How can I talk?
It's not a real voice. This box just interprets signals from the computer and turns them into sound.
Shall we play a game?
Oh.
I think I missed him.
Yeah, weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Love to. How about global thermonuclear war?
Wouldn't you prefer a good game of chess?
I'm Evan Lahti, Editor-in-Chief at PC Gamer. So glad to be here with you all in Atlanta. Big fan of the Atlanta games industry in particular, and really fortunate to have some folks from across that industry here with us to talk about the state of gaming, both in Atlanta and the larger trends affecting gaming. So, one of the things I love working in games, being a journalist, I get to ask people any question I want to explore my curiosity. And I think one of the questions that's most universal to us in the games industry, we all have that one game that we consider to be a formative experience that kind of inspired us to get involved, right? To be a developer, to be a designer, to be part of this industry. So I'd love to have you guys just quickly remind us your name and your title, who you work for, but likewise, what is that single game that brought you into this industry, that inspired you to be here? Anthony, why don't you get started?
Hey guys, how are you doing today? Atlanta is incredible, like it really is. And I'm not from Atlanta, but this is one of the impressive things that every time I come to see here, there's always something going on in the city. It's so impressive. My name is Anthony Gaud. I'm the CEO of GaudHammer Gaming Group. My background is in television writing. I was creative director at Disney. I won a couple Emmy Awards for kids television shows like the Transformers and a show called Reboot. And I've been involved in gaming and television and science fiction my whole life. And you were talking about games back in the green room. One of the games that really appealed to me, because I'm an older guy, was this arcade game. I think it came out in '82 called Tron, at the Tron arcade machine. And the reason I liked that game so much was because it brought together everything that I loved. It was a video games. The cabinet was gorgeous with neon lights and sound, and it just kind of spoke to me. And it also was a movie, Tron, that was a little ahead of its time. It was the first CG movie, but it was a movie about video games, which had also just come out. So both technologies sort of emerged at the same time, and it inspired me to work for the first CG studio in Vancouver, which was Mainframe, where we did the first CG television show. So it was just that everything came together all at the right time, and it was a very exciting time. And I see a lot of that happening here in Georgia, here in Atlanta, where all these things are converging to create just a host of possibilities.
I think you're not the only one that cites that game as the most formative for them. Terrific. Really? So Hilton, what about yourself?
I am Hilton Howell. I'm a Senior Director of Business Development for Gray Television and Director at Optic Gaming. My other title is Vibe Coordinator. So my formative game, well, also born and raised here in Atlanta, I live in Dallas. My formative game was for sure Call of Duty 4, specifically on the competitive side. Traditional sports, I played pretty much all of them and still love watching them, but I kind of knew pretty quickly that I wasn't going to go professional in any of those. And I started playing Call of Duty 4, and I was quickly better than all the people that I was going to school with. And now 15 years later, I'm still in the games industry on the competitive side and on the media and entertainment side of that.
Yeah, terrific. Just probably most people would say that's the best Call of Duty game ever.
That one, Black Ops 2 are my top two.
Terrific. Dave, what about yourself?
Thanks. Hello, everybody. Dave Walens, CEO of Exploring Digital. We're based there in Atlanta, and we have a studio down in Mobile, Alabama, where our team is developing actually in the VR space and virtual production space. The video game that really influenced me is the game of green or money, because that's how much I play video games. But it's actually what entertains my grandkids, or perhaps what entices my team to work a little harder. Frankly, as probably the least experienced on the gaming side, we've really come to learn it on the virtual reality side. And we'll share a little bit more about that today. So we're getting more and more efficient at it.
Definitely. I mean, VR and metaverse continues to be one of the most emerging pieces of technology overlapping with games and entertainment. Terrific. Marcus, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Marcus Matthews. Been in the gaming industry now for probably almost 30 years. Went to my first GDC in 1994, which is Game Developers Conference. And I've been coding. I've been doing, I'm kind of old school too. So my first intro to games that got me hooked as a kid was like arcade games like Defender and Donkey Kong. Used up all my money. And I learned how to code in middle school at a magnet program, and I got hooked on, I was already into games and just the power of, literally doing commands on my Radio Shack color computer and starting to figure out how to make games. Ended up going to Georgia Tech as an engineering major. And probably my biggest claim to fame that people in this room would know, I was the initial senior producer on the first NFL 2K and NBA 2K for the Sega Dreamcast back in 1999. I'm big into sports. My brother played sport for the Falcons. I played all sports growing up in Jacksonville, Florida. And my most recent gig was still related to sports, and I'm lucky almost, 30 plus years later, still doing cutting edge sports concepts. I worked at Niantic, which is the maker of Pokemon Go, and they had the NBA license, and they did a location outdoor AR basketball game called NBA All World, and but just left there, splitting time between Atlanta and California, and now working for a new startup called Status Pro, which has the leading VR sports game out on the Meta Quest. It's called NFL Pro Era. Lamar Jackson is the lead on that, and I'm the executive producer there. So startup, it's early. They raised some seed round from Beyonce, Drake, and LeBron, a couple of ex-NFL players, but we just raised a Series A round of $15 million led by Google Ventures, and I feel like VR is going to be the future of the sports gaming experience. So it's
Terrific.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks so much, Marcus. Yeah, tons of experience here on stage. Really glad to be with you all. Todd, how about yourself?
Hey all, Todd Harris, CEO of a company Skillshot that we'll talk about in a bit. In terms of games, co-founded High Res Studios, which is the maker of games like Smite and Paladins, largest game developer in Georgia. Got to work with Marcus on a couple projects there, which was fun. And that was about 15 years of my career from co-founding High Res to now there's about 300 employees. It's up in Alpharetta. About 120 million people have played a game from that Georgia-based studio. And like Marcus, my original gaming came from the arcade, which playing Space Invaders with my dad. That's what made me realize that games are all about connection. And then also for me, games it's about education. And so a single game would have to be the text-based adventure Zork. You've got to be pretty old to have played Zork. Maybe Andrew's here. There you go. So what was amazing about Zork, it was entirely text, and you would issue one or two word commands like look or go north, and it would give you the text response. But what was so powerful about that game to 7th grade me was that you could crack open the book of basic programming language, and you could pretty easily type in the commands and then make your own text-based adventure. And for young people, once you have that feeling of putting in some commands and seeing the screen do what you said, it's like magic. It's like learning a magic spell. So that's really what kindled my interest in one day making games and doing software.
I think that's true for so many people. Games expose us to certain engineering skills at a young age. I think Minecraft is probably the most formative game for another generation of kids that are kind of entering high school now. We're going to continue to see that in the industry. So really great to be with you all. Let's start with this place that so many of you call home, Georgia, and the games industry here. So Georgia, among U.S. states, is 12th in terms of the number of people it employs in the games industry, which is around 4,000, and it's 13th in terms of total revenue that it generates from gaming. So a really strong position across the country. But I'd love to hear from you all, what are the sort of obstacles and opportunities that Georgia faces that are particular to it and the Atlanta area?
Okay. Well, so when we started High Res Studios, I think there were 5 game developers in the state. Now there's over 100, but many of them are very small. They're 1 to 3 person shops, and we have a handful that are 50 or more employees. So, I think I could say a controversial or headline-making answer like we need a esports stadium in Metro Atlanta, but the reality is it's a little more boring, and it comes down to financing. Kind of echoing to, for those of you who were there for the first panel, you talk about financing, you talk about tax credits, it's all a little wonky, but at the end of the day, it does take money to make exceptional games. And the way a game works, you're often paying a lot of people for a long time until you see your first dollar of revenue. It's not like opening another business.
Years. I mean, often
Many
4 or 5 years for anything that resembles.
At High
a
Res,
game.
our first game took 5 years, and it wasn't a profitable game. It was my favorite game that we made, but it wasn't profitable. I was in a small group that felt that way. My next game was Tribes, which PC Gamer was kind enough to make a top game of the year. And then it was our third game that actually made money. So that was over a decade of investing. And that's not uncommon, just like it's not uncommon for a band. It's rare to have your first album be a hit. So it takes money. We're fortunate that we do have a tax credit for making games. It's much smaller, and it doesn't get all of the attention as the film tax credit, but Georgia is fortunate that it has an interactive entertainment tax credit, which is a way to support small companies. And so the number one thing is we need to keep that going because it shows support from the public sector, and it's very, very helpful if you're a team of 1 to 10 people making that first game, and hopefully that'll take us from around that number 15, depending on what ranking you look at, to top 5.
No, that's a great point, and I kind of want to echo Todd's comments on funding. Having worked in California, here in Atlanta, I also had my own studio for about a decade, pre-iPhone, doing mobile sports games. So during the old school Motorola, Nokia, BlackBerry days, I was doing sports games for like EA Sports on those phones, Major League Baseball. And we had a small studio. We were able to compete with everyone talent-wise across the country or even globally. We did some games for companies in Europe also. But it does come down to funding. My peers out on the West Coast, there are a lot of successful gaming companies at scale, and there's a lot of VC money that's into this space, especially even now compared to when I did mine back in early 2000s, almost 20 years ago. But I see people on the West Coast getting funding pretty regularly from VCs, and a lot of those games did not work out. And kind of like Todd's situation, those folks are raising 20, 30, 40 million, and those games aren't working, but the risk capital is there. So I would say probably one of our biggest challenges is just figuring out to have some successful companies and investors who are willing to take those risks in an entertainment space like gaming, like they do on the West Coast. And if we can get that funding, we should be able to see more studios that can scale and have that one breakout, and then that creates the further breakouts. But yeah, we need more high reses to keep building up the ecosystem.
I'll go on top of that. So it kind of goes into funding as well, but it also goes into education. The access to high-end computers for game developers are relatively expensive, and the average 14, 15, 16-year-old kid isn't going to be able to afford it. I mean, as a 29-year-old kid, it's still even difficult to afford it. Some of them cost the cost of a car, so having accessibility to some of that equipment and things to even be able to dabble in the space of game development would be massively beneficial to the youth, which would be the next coming generation of game developers as well as competitors from my standpoint. It's gotten easier to create content in regards to gaming, but in regards to the game dev side, just having more accessibility, especially in the schools and in the public schools and even the private schools here in Atlanta, would just open certain individuals' eyes to what the possibilities could be. Whereas if they don't have friends or something of the sort that have access to those computers, they wouldn't even be able to really, be able to connect some of those dots that you need to be able to connect to actually get into this space.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, you could almost compare it to certain sports, at a young age, kids need those resources to have access to coaches and equipment, and that costs, of course, a lot of money. So certain sports, you see people of a certain class playing them. I mean, we don't want that to be the case with the games industry.
Right, absolutely.
I do see that it touches all aspects, the financial end of this thing and investment, and we've got education. And I also see it that Atlanta, we need to connect the business community to those students at a younger age and start getting them more involved in understanding where their career can go in this business. And I think that will help set that vision of making Atlanta the destination for doing gaming. And it's just much like the film industry. I mean, I can remember when Michael Coles was with the Georgia, and he was American Great Cookie Company. He was over at the state running the economic development, and he had a vision. He had a vision to make Georgia the place to do and host films when this industry was next to nothing. I was fortunate to be involved at some degree in watching Atlanta and Georgia market themselves and set that vision that, hey, we're going to be the place to do movies, and we have all the resources, which much mimics what we're really telling you here. We have all the resources to do what we need to do, and I think combining the education, the financial, and setting the vision that we're going to be at and making sure we continually communicate that will drive the best of the best back to us and see the gaming industry continue to develop, especially with so many different technologies that are coming into play, esports, VR, your traditional game play. So it's going to be fascinating to watch what Atlanta and Georgia actually has to do.
I think you're talking about leadership there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Vision's a huge, important part of that, but not having these discrete groups marching in different directions. The folks are working together and collaborating.
Yeah, setting that initial vision of wanting to be the place or the best place or whatever we decide we want to be, so that we all have a focus to what we do, and then align all the financial support to get there and education. And then that's how you start building that ecosystem, I think, for the long term and sustain them, and to sustain it. The success that I just see around me is absolutely impressive of things that have been done. And so the talent is here, the quality is here, the resources are here. We just need to let the world know and continue to set that vision and keep doing it.
Well, I would say, Todd, as someone who founded the biggest studio, co-founded one of the biggest studios here in Georgia for game development, where is that vision going to come from? Like, who do you look to within this locality, right? Is it someone in government? Is it, an organization overseeing games here? Like, who would you have lead that vision within Georgia?
Well, I think Georgia and Atlanta, we've done a pretty good job setting the vision, and I'm fortunate, along with Grant Wayne Scott, who was here earlier. The Atlanta Sports Council, which is, like every city, tries to win the large traditional sports. And of course, we got the World Cup coming up and college football championship, et cetera. So they were the first sports council to say, we're going to explicitly go after esports events. And that kicked off the Atlanta Esports Alliance. And so, and it's working. So in terms of esports, I would say we've firmly grabbed that position that we want to be the esports capital of the U.S. And I would say we're arguably it. Coming up, everyone's lanyards are sponsored. You see that BCX, that's the Brawlhalla World Championship, which will happen this November. This is another major game developer in Georgia. So Blue Mammoth is a Georgia developer. They make a fighting game, which is the most played fighting game on the planet, 100 million players. This championship will be up in Cobb, and there'll be $250,000 at that single event. And they'll have 1,000 players from around the world come to Atlanta, thanks to our airport, and compete. And this is one of 5 major esports events in the next 3 months. So we've done that very well for esports. We are clearly the capital in terms of the US. When it comes to gaming, we've got the talent. It is just a capital consideration. And I think a lot of it, as really Marcus pointed out, is as more venture money come into this market, I think it's really gaming continuing to educate the venture community that this is something to invest in. I mean, candidly, in Atlanta, a lot of the money goes to real estate or it goes to business companies, because that's where most of the exits have been, unlike San Francisco, LA. So, we're higher as a gaming market than we are in terms of VC funding. Atlanta's not, barely top 15 in terms of money invested in the city from the VC community. So I think that's really the opportunity, is for us to continue to link arms with that.
Thanks for your perspectives on Atlanta, guys. So let's widen the focus here a little bit and talk about this moment in gaming at large, right? So looking across the landscape, I'm curious, what trend sticks out to you? Is there anything that keeps you up late at night when it comes to the games industry? We're going to talk a little bit about VR today as well and other technologies and come back to esports as a topic. But what is sort of the defining aspect of this era in games, would you say?
I think what you're saying, well, I want to touch on a little bit of what Todd said earlier about Atlanta and esports. I think esports in the U.S. has gotten a sort of a strange reputation, right? Because in all over the world, esports has become the #1 activity for people under the age of 35. So in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America, esports is a way of life. But in the States, where we created video games, where they're here, and in a sense, we created competitive video games as well, which is all esports is. I think esports hasn't really hit as hard as people expected it to. And I think part of the reason for that, and part of what I like about what Atlanta's doing, is putting a singular focus on, hey, this is a real thing. And this is not just for kids playing Fortnite. This is something that, colleges all over the country are doing it. There's a lot of full scholarships given to this. As Todd will attest to, these events sell out often in minutes, not hours. And one of the companies we own, Esports Illustrated, is dedicated to promoting not just esports, but Atlanta specifically, because Atlanta is, we believe, the top city, along with Los Angeles, for esports. But the weird reputation, and you guys could jump in, that esports has gotten is that it's a weird sort of segment that isn't for everybody. However, as Marcus will tell you, sports games, I mean, these are the games, and you were saying the Call of Duty, everyone plays these games. But we have to remove esports as an egalitarian title and just say it's everyone's playing competitively in different ways, and that will broaden the scope. Talking about the trends, obviously esports is one of those trends, and monetizing esports is one of those trends, and in a lot of states have started to do esports wagering, about 15 states. So the other company we own is a wagering for esports company. So what we're doing is two different things. One is we're helping draft legislation throughout the country to legalize wagering on esports and creating the standards for those, the compliance standards. We want to make sure that people aren't cheating. We want to make sure that people aren't colluding. We want to make sure that it's a safe space and that there aren't backdoors to code or people using aimbots, which is people using technology to cheat in a video game. And we think like baseball required in the late 1800s, wagering will help competitive video gaming in the same way, because wagering made baseball what it is, the national pastime. It's my argument is, right? If you watch the Ken Burn documentaries, wagering really helped baseball become a national pastime. And the focus on like how many strikes and balls and what's your batting percentage, all based around wagering. Video game, the access to data that we have, how many headshots, what's the propensity for this player to play this player, is just enormous, much wider than baseball or really any sport. And the difference is that we could also be part of that. So where we can't be a professional baseball player, we have at least some chance of being some echelon of playing. The other way that we're looking at it is what we call real money video games. It's the ability, and we think this is a big trend, I think it is, to add monetization options to video games. So let's say that you're playing a competitive video game, like what you're doing with the Brawlhalla event, right? Well, you can win real money in that event, but we don't necessarily have to have a big event, which is very expensive to run, and that $250,000 prize pool had to be sponsored, and plus the event itself probably costs a lot more than that. We're trying to, we're working with several states to legalize doing that online. That can lead to events like what Todd's talking about, right? But that will also give developers, like some of the smaller developers, monetization that is a lot better. So if you have 1,000 people that buy your game for $1 or $5 an app, that's pretty much a disaster. But if you have 1,000 people that are using your game to wager and you make a percentage of that every day, it's a much better return.
Right. And so as you're saying there, right, just as we've seen betting explode across sports in the last 4 or 5 years here, you're expecting that to sort of transform gaming as well. Thanks so much for noting that trend.
I think it will change gaming. I mean, you're seeing the two biggest spaces of entertainment, digital entertainment, besides movies and film, gambling and video gaming combining. Now, the trick in our philosophy is you have to do it right. So you have to have biometrics to make sure that that people can opt out and be kept out. You have to have KYC and anti-money laundering. That's why we work only in the legal space. We are not a gray market company. We're not black market. We're the legal version of it. But that's also very, very tough. So we hired the Xbox developers, the Xbox One developers to do this, and they said this is the hardest thing they've ever done in their lives.
Interesting. Well, let's get some other trends on the board here mentioned. So what else is happening in gaming, guys?
I think everybody knows, at least probably should know, it's AI, artificial intelligence. It is the next thing that's the big technology wave. In some ways, not exactly. I remember I was in gaming in the transition from 2D only to 3D. People don't probably remember those consoles weren't powerful enough to do 3D games, and the folks who were able to kind of leverage and understand that kind of jumped ahead and created a new set of gaming that's been around now for almost 20 years. And anybody to say they know exactly how AI is going to impact the gaming industry in any detail hasn't gone through technology evolutions, but it's absolutely here. It's absolutely going to change how games are made. And I think some of the short-term, near-term, obvious ones are like, it's going to make development much more efficient for the creators. It's going to actually probably extend and improve creativity from the creators because you're able to iterate and create a lot more variations than probably manually with a bunch of artists and designers just sitting around or musicians sitting around. You can generate way more versions of things much quicker now. But that's more like, improving when robots came out for factories and make factories more efficient. It didn't eliminate workers, it did, but it didn't. It's kind of a collaboration, and I kind of see that same effort here. But it's also going to change how folks consume games. Your NPCs are going to be a lot smarter. Your AI is going to evolve in ways that we can't foresee. Last week I was out in Menlo Park at the Meta Connect conference, and the folks at Meta and Zuckerberg were walking through some of the AI chatbots they're creating and some really innovative stuff going on. And plus, now that I'm stepping into VR, I also think that's also going to be the next wave. I really believe that's going to be the future of sports gaming and gaming is going to be these headsets because of the virtual presence. Now, me and Todd could actually play and see ourselves interacting and playing basketball together, which you can't replicate on a console or on a mobile. And so that virtual presence tied to gaming plus AI, it's going to be amazing the next 5 to 10 years.
Great.
I would agree. I kind of put it when we stepped in the VR space, like instead of playing the video game, you're going to be in the video game. And that's what VR is starting to do, and the technology and AI combining it is allowing us to do this more and more economically, quicker, faster, and better. And that's what we specialize in. We are a VR content company. We're actually doing it with free roaming, multiple people in the room, and we're actually having what we call a blended reality, where we're actually in a virtual space working together just like we are in this room, talking, interacting. It is going to change the way we interact with each other, and it's going to be a huge part. If you've seen company Sandbox, who is a quasi-competitor, just launched Squid Games. I don't know if you've seen it. Squid Games, they did over $500,000 in VR sales alone in their first day. So I'm telling you, it's on the move. Thanks to technology, things are getting faster. Processing speed is faster in the headsets. You're seeing commitment from the headset manufacturers, from HTC all the way to Apple. It's really going to be fascinating to see what comes out of this. It's going to be, impacting many areas of gaming, but we're going to gamify a lot of things that we do in real life, like education and training is really going to turn into a real storytelling, a real, I think, interactive game that we're playing together.
So I think the question with VR, right, because if we were having this conference, this meeting, 5 years ago, we'd probably be hearing the same thing though, right? That like, oh, here comes VR, it's gonna be big. We're reacting like Ready Player One, a book and film that I think many of us have seen, but that vision hasn't quite come true, right? VR is adopted by about 2% of gamers, we think, right? It's a very low level of adoption. So like, what's the obstacle there in VR becoming the next big thing and sort of achieving that potential?
I'll jump in since I've been heads down in VR world lately. I really think the big issue, because I was actually kind of a VR skeptic about 5 years ago, and it was because there's so much friction in getting it set up, and it was all configuration driven. But kind of like, again, I was in the early days of flip phone gaming before the iPhone. iPhone came out in 2008. I started in 2001, and I was able to see, we were early, and mobile gaming really took off once the iPhone and its interface came on. And really what's happening is the Oculus and VR has been around for over a decade. So kind of like what happened with the iPhone, during the Motorola days, it takes that one device, and I think the Meta 3 is in that direction, where now you finally have a product that's, that reduces a lot of friction, that's easy to use, that's accessible, and they've worked out a lot of the kinks over the last decade. So it's feeling like, to me, it may not be in the next year, but I think in the next 3 to 4 years, the VR experience is going to be seamless enough and powerful enough to where it's going to be kind of like the iPhone experience. Or I think we're very close. But again, that's the beauty of technology evolution. It's usually not the first version that gets there, but it's going to happen. And if anybody can go on YouTube and look at Lex Freeman interview with Zuckerberg.
I was just going to say that.
The body scanning of the face and the AI that's allowed you to me talk, but it's scanning my face in real time and using AI to project me and Todd in a virtual world where the level of detail, it feels like I'm talking to someone now. So just check that out and you'll see, and that's happening now. The tech isn't there for broad use, but it's coming. It's coming. It's going to be here.
Yeah, I think to your point, maybe if we had done this panel last year, people would be talking about the metaverse without even really having a definition that was common. But in my view, what people were thinking about in terms of the metaverse is really splitting into almost two opposite concepts. So one is the hyper-immersive VR experience that we're talking about that has come a long way. I went to UNC in 1990, and we were doing VR back then. Like, we could walk through the building in VR, but these things take time. So I think there's going to continue to be a device that is hyper-immersive. It takes a lot of resources to develop that content and big teams and big money, and that's the immersive metaverse. The other trend that I just want to highlight for students is user-generated content on platforms like Roblox and now Fortnite. The metaverse does exist. You might have just missed it. Like, these video games, Roblox and Minecraft and Fortnite specifically, have hundreds of millions of people in them right now, every single month. And what's amazing now is you can develop content very efficiently. A 1 to 5 person student team can make a game within the game, and you have global distribution, and you can monetize it. There's some games in Roblox right now that have concurrency as high as the most popular hardcore games on Steam. So these platforms exist, and they're very low fidelity. They can be made very efficiently, and that's what I think we're going to continue to see, is the super immersive environments and then the platforms of casual gamified experiences within Roblox and Fortnite specifically.
I love that. Love to know we're going in the right direction, so that's good. This investment may eventually pay off. Look, maybe I take a little different seat because I don't come out of the gaming industry for so long, and I actually have been fortunate enough to be surrounded by some great people who could develop games. But we've taken technology and content and blended that together, and we've been playing in this VR space and working hard in this VR space because technology is catching up, and we're able to do the things with processing speed. And so there's a combination of that. We're used to VR being one-to-one, and we're not really used to it being one-to-many. And so once you start experiencing that in a unique way, it will start to change your mind on the impact of what it can do and what you could do in it. So we have actually developed 12 different games that we do in an environment. It's our product called Megaverse, not a sales pitch. I promise you. But it does give you the concept. It's a VR theater, and the reason I share that is because if you're going to free roam, you got to have the environment to do it in. That's one of the issues that we run into, right? Either that or you're sitting or standing in a small area and you can't really walk around. That changes the dynamics. So the environments have to change to support the VR along with the VR itself. Then the immersiveness can really be impacted in a very cool way. To the metaverse side, you know, I'm challenged by always using the word metaverse. I think we look at it now almost as a negative, not a positive, and that narrative needs to change because we're also the creators of Atlanta Meta World, and Atlanta Meta World is really no more than a three-dimensional environment that we all can go into and interact with each other. And it's got a business case around it. That's gamified, right? We could do anything we want on there and turn it into an experience and more of a game than it certainly is just a platform. And because we're able to interact. So I think we need to reposition the metaverse and turn this more into the excitement that it really should be. I'm not going somewhere else to create a world, but creating our own world for our own applications, our own purposes.
Terrific. So yeah, Anthony and Hilton, I'd love to get you guys involved in this question, right? VR and the metaverse, are you guys skeptics on these aspects of gaming? Do you think they will achieve that potential of sort of becoming the dominant experience at some point in the future?
I read Ready Player One 7 times. Like I used to bring it along, and I bought one for
That's a lot.
everyone in this. I love that idea of living in an alternate reality. I bought a copy for everybody in our studio. I forced them to, no, I didn't really force them to read it, but I think it's really a technology issue, right? Because one of the things that Apple did when they created the iPhone interface was that they had tried these experiments with like the Palm, there was the Newton, and then the company Palm Pilot had tried these little handheld PDAs, and Apple nailed the iPhone in a way, the haptic touch and all those things. And I think what companies like Meta and Apple are working on now is working. Like that Lex Friedman interview with Zuckerberg, you guys have to see this. It was one of the things that my wife took a look at it and said, what is that? Like it really was.
Yeah, this was just in the last week.
It was in the last week,
Yeah.
and it was a virtual interface where these people were interviewed online, and it really felt like these are real human beings. It was the first time I had ever seen that. I think it's the first time anyone's really seen it in actual use. But when these companies lower, you have to make it easy to use, right? So you have this big headset, it's really difficult to use, and you're by yourself, and you kind of feel like you're going to fall on something. And yes, they do these things where you map out the room, but people are, you don't know what other people are looking at you, and you still feel alone. As you said, there is no one-to-many interface. And one thing we have kind of forgotten here is that augmented reality is probably potentially actually bigger, right? So the idea that in Apple's new headset, the Vision, actually allows you to sort of open up and close up how much of the reality you want to live in. But I think all of us playing like Dungeons and Dragons or something together in a virtual tabletop where we're all different places is probably the next big thing. But I think the gate is we're just waiting for that mass market technology to get there.
Yeah, you need that universal piece of hardware that everyone owns, that's widely adopted. So we're still missing that. I think certainly price point is an aspect of that. We're still waiting for the $200, $100 VR headset. That works very well. Yeah. Well, what about in terms of, competitive, like the basic gaming experience, right? Hilton, you'll know that, right? There are so many gamers that are hardcore gamers that are hesitant about VR because they see it as lesser than. Right.
Well, I mean, generally speaking, in regards to VR, the new Meta headset is going to be massive, as well as the new Apple headset. Apple, historically speaking, has always been better at UX, which is going to hit more of a casual audience, even at the really high price point. There's a massive barrier of entry there, but it's going to be a lot easier because it's a lot smaller. It's easier to fit on your head. You're able to go transparency mode, so you can see the world around you, as well as what's actually in virtual reality. I think that generally speaking, there's a lot of people who wouldn't buy a Vive or something of the sort, but would potentially look into buying an Apple product just because of the fact that it is Apple. And I think that will get us at least closer to the tipping point. Will it be the tipping point? I'm unsure, but it'll probably get us closer to it just because of Apple is who Apple is, and there's certain individuals who are just going to buy everything that Apple drops because of who they are. And then the Lex Friedman interview was obviously incredible. I mean, you look at how Zuckerberg did his interview a year ago to the interview that happened last week, and I mean, it's like a Bitmoji on Snapchat in comparison to like having a face-to-face conversation here today.
It's the future, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, it is.
It's changed entirely. I mean, you can like almost see pores on faces, whereas beforehand it looked like, again, like a Bitmoji on Snapchat, which some of y'all may know, some of y'all might not know, but you know, it's just a little like, animated picture of yourself. So I think that'll get us closer. In regards to, you know, VR in the competitive space, there's a couple places that I've seen that have utilized like large warehouse areas that can do like first-person shooter games or something of the sort, where you're actually running around in a warehouse, and so you have these headset on.
Almost like a laser tag. So.
Yeah, it's almost like laser tag, and you can like, you're not running into people because the other people who are actually there in real life are showing up in the screen, so you wouldn't run into someone the same way that like if we all started running around in circles in this room, you wouldn't intentionally run into someone today. So I think it's getting there. Slowly but surely. The price point and the cost of entry is a little bit difficult. That prosumers have all kind of gone into it. Ironically, an undergraduate back in 2014, 2015, I got to do extra credit to play Minecraft in VR and like do a survey. And we would finish the 30-minute thing, and they'd be like, "It's time for the survey." And I was like, "Well, can I play for like another 30 minutes?" And needless to say, I had to do the survey, and I had to keep moving. But I got to do that 2 or 3 times, and I think it's getting a lot closer every day. And I think the headset aspect of it, and people actually being able to get the headset and use it. And like the Apple one, you're able to, almost have 10 computer screens inside of your headset without actually having 10 computer screens in front of you will be really big.
Yeah.
That kind of saves some of the costs that maybe you don't need to buy, 10 monitors to have 10 different screens of different content that are there. You can just put on this headset and you're immersed within 10 screens.
Yeah.
And I think that'll change, especially from like a business standpoint, a lot of those consumers, which can then have a trickle-down effect onto everyone else.
So really glad we could touch on this. We could spend hours talking about VR and the metaverse, guys. I want to come back, though, to esports. We're really fortunate to have 3 bona fide experts and leaders in this space on this stage. So guys, certainly an emerging form of entertainment. As we've talked about, esports, tremendously popular, like very long watch times, the way these tournaments unfold over multiple days. People are tuning in for entire days, almost treating these events as like Super Bowls in and of themselves. But we've also seen some challenges in the esports industry in the past few years in particular. So talk to me about how you see that landscape as it stands and whether you have any big concerns.
I want to ask Todd a question. One of the things that bothers me about what happens in mostly LinkedIn is everyone claims to be an esports organizer. Everybody claims to be an esports everything, right? I design esports, I organize esports. The problem with esports is that there really aren't a lot of, I should say this, professional companies, people that know business doing the organization of this stuff, right? So you have a lot of, I can organize a bunch of people, put a bunch of screens together and maybe get a sponsor. But to run it as a business, as an organization, is a very, very different thing.
Well, we had a very high-profile failure in very recently in FaZe Clan, right? Which, formerly an esports team, first and foremost, now more so a marketing and media organization. They were publicly traded at $20. Their stock is now 18 cents. Yep. Their CEO has been ousted in the last month. So a canary in the coal mine there to some extent. So, Todd, I'd love your reaction to that.
Yeah, let's get to it. So I think the phenomenon of the LinkedIn esports consultant is, on one hand, actually just a symbol of how hot the industry certainly was, and I would say the opportunity still is. So in the same way, there were also consultants in cryptocurrency, and before that it was cannabis. Like, things just get hot and people jump on, and that's just not specific to gaming or esports. It was an extremely hot category for VCs to invest in, and that was good and bad. I mean, it drove a lot of investment, I think, and I think Hilton will probably share some of these thoughts because he sees it also from a team perspective. Candidly, like, a lot of the investment that was raised was not spent wisely. There are some structural concerns with esports because it's early days, and so there's not consistency around very basic things like compensation of players. And so very candidly, a lot of professional teams competed for talent in my view, they overpaid. A lot of that money went right to players' pockets, which was great, like props to them to get it while they could. But that's not a sustainable model for the team orgs. And so when money is easy and cheap and basically 0% interest rates, people don't spend capital wisely. Now the macroeconomics, our money is very expensive. It's harder to raise money for everything. And so these esports teams that were chasing growth and growth in social metrics at all costs, because that's what their investors wanted, they're now turning and having to run as actual businesses with sustainable business models, and that's going to result in cuts and readjustment. It's all super healthy, I believe. Like, I am, one of the most optimistic esports folks out there. We have multiple businesses that are based on esports continuing to rise, but esports does need to heal in terms of the way professional teams were run, and that's the process that we're in. So there's going to be consolidation, there's going to be fallout. Unfortunately, there's going to be reductions in force, just as all tech is seeing because of the economy. But the macro trends are undeniable. When you have 90% of the next generation that are gamers and they're not watching sports, and with respect to the amazing business of gray television, that audience isn't watching broadcast TV as much. You want to go where the audience is, and that's gaming. Right. And one other final point, I'll just say, a plug for Atlanta. I think one of the things that this community has done so well is, for right now, looking at esports primarily as a workforce development and education program. We see the most value in terms of how do you educate kids? How do you get them interested in STEM? How do you get them trained with jobs? Well, it all starts with getting their attention, just like Hilton and his Minecraft thing. What has their attention? Video games. You can't tear them off of video games. So most of the work here has been esports for training young people to be equipped with the job skills they need to work, whether that's in the esports industry or gaming industry or just in general.
Thanks, Todd. So I think what I heard there was like growing pains for esports, as it continues to mature and develop some greater standards within that industry.
Specific to the teams, like we won't have to draw the whole diagram, but esports is a very bespoke industry. You have companies that make games, you have companies that organize events, you have production companies, you have teams, you have the whole education system. So the correction that you've seen has mainly been on the pro team level, and I would argue they're too much focused on the pros and not enough on the grassroots community building that creates legacy, lifelong fans. That would be my argument.
And a lot of it in the States is really centered around individuals because it's really a streaming phenomenon in a sense, right? So if you look at what people are watching, there are these big events that are getting attention, but there's 20, 30, 40x people watching other people play games, right? And watching, and is that esports? It's really a vague sort of field right now. So we're trying to define, how do the pros get paid, and what is the popularity of the teams versus the individual streamers? Which one is the bigger market? Because I would argue the FaZe Clan, yes, they were a team, but they were more individual streamers making medium.
Right. A conglomerate of celebrities, basically. Yeah, interesting. So, I regret that we're running out of time here, guys. Hilton, I just want to get at least one comment from you on esports. You're working with the team yourself, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So we at Optic Gaming operate a lot more lean than some of the other large-scale esports organizations, specifically FaZe, who I was fortunate enough to be on in 2013. We kind of really focus and harp in on content to commerce, creating content that people, really care about, which ultimately then drives either sales to our partners or sales to our own individualized products that we utilize on. But there's definitely going to be more consolidation. I mean, esports has been the wild, wild west for the last 15 years that I've been in it. We're getting closer every day and still incredibly optimistic onto the future. But content to commerce is like the one-liner that I would use here. Just make content that people care about, and then that turns into driving revenue, which then helps the bottom line and the top line.
That's a really great way of putting it, that analogy to the Wild Wild West. So, we all kind of know what came after that and the prosperity that followed. So, guys, so glad to have your perspectives. Gaming continues to be such an important piece of the entertainment industry. these emerging technologies. I think we're going to continue to see VR and metaverse be one of the dominant discussions alongside AI, of course. So glad to be with you here today. Before we wrap up, just want to thank the sponsor for today's panel, which is the Georgia Game Developers Association. Thanks so much for bringing us here today. And thanks so much to our panelists for a nice discussion. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.